Hello everyone, welcome to our last coding tutorial in this Intro to Java series. In this coding tutorial, we're going to look at files and working with them in our Java code. So let's go ahead and start by a standard example of what you could use when you're working with some files in Java. Now, before you get started, when you're working with your files in Java, you need to import the specific modules that you may need for that. So the first one we're going to need is import java.io. Now this one is going to be used to work with our files. And of course, we are going to have, hold on, let me make our notes. And we're going to have our other generic one, java.util. All right, and asterisk, so that we can get all of the classes in there. All right, so that's the very first step you need to take. You have to make sure that you are importing those before you get started, so make sure you do that. Now, inside of here is where we are going to write our code. So we have our main method. So let's go ahead and just write some code. So first we are going to create a file object. So we would do that saying file. We'll give it a name. We'll just say F. And then we'll say equals new file. And in this case, we can say data.txt. All right. Now we have a file object. We're basically saying that F is going to be data.txt. Now next we'll say scanner sc equals new scanner. And then we are going to use F inside of our scanner. So this example here would be to read the file. So example, we'll say reading a file. All right. So basically what we're saying is we're going to have a file, in this case data.txt. We're going to pass that file into the scanner so that it can read the file. All right. And basically, let's take a look at this error we're having here. And you see it immediately says unreported exception file not found. Must be caught or declared to be thrown. So we would have to do our file not found exception or throw it. Now, I didn't necessarily show this in the lecture, but I'll show it here in the coding tutorial because I like personally the try and catch, because you also basically can force a specific outcome or a specific message in that case. With this way, not so much, so I don't necessarily recommend this way, but I will still show you. So what you can do is on the method that is calling or doing this file manipulation, so in this case reading a file, we can add what's called a throw, and we're going to throw the file not found exception, which will pretty much allow this exception to pretty much apply to this whole method. So you see our error is now gone when we added that. And in here, we can now continue to write. So we can say while sc dot has next and then line. Then we could say here system dot out dot print, print line sc dot next line. Now this line is basically saying while scanner has another line to be read, then you're going to here print that current line. All right. And here this scanner reads the file. All right. So now technically our code is clean. The last thing we want to do is make sure we close our scanner. So close scanner, and we're going to say sc.close. All right, so technically we have some clean code written. You can use your file not found exception this way by throwing it. I technically, again, did not mention that in the lecture, but I will show it here because you may see it as you're doing your own research. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we run this. All right, so we basically have a file not found exception. So we are seeing here that we still, excuse me, we are still seeing the exception pop up because we are not using that try catch block. So therefore it does not just override the exception from occurring, except it's more so saying that we're just going to throw out the exception or pretty much ignore it and continue on, and that's what we're basically doing here. So we are running to issues here, but you saw that it technically did not have an error once we did that throw, so it didn't have an error when we used our scanner and passed that file object. So again, don't necessarily recommend this way, but I did want to show you all this way because it is something you may see or come across. So in this case, it just pretty much crashed because, okay, the file did not exist. Okay, so down here, we're pretty much saying data.txt, no such file or directory, because we do not have that over here. Okay, so what we can do is say new, let's see if I can find it, other, and let's see if we can find our empty file here. And you see we have all these other files that you can create as well. So you don't necessarily have to work with a text file, but in this IDE that we're working with, you see there's all these different things other than your basic test files. And here is where we've been working out of for the most part. But there are other files you can work with in here. So let's just go ahead and do empty file. We'll say next. We're going to say, what did we name it? Data.txt. And now we basically have this empty file. So we can say this is the data.txt file. Here is some test data, and then I'm just gonna type some numbers and then hello everyone. All right, so I saved that, and we now have a data file, and you see that it's saved in our project folder over here, or source package. So if I return here and we try to run our file now, let's see what happens. And you see we're still technically getting the data.txt no such file found, because technically sometimes working with this file it can cause issues depending on the path. So when you're working with NetBeans, it's a little bit harder for your programs to find the file just because of how NetBeans set up their projects or their file structure for their projects. So it pretty much makes it a little complicated due to the way it nests its projects. If you're using an IDE such as Visual Studio Code or something like that, this probably would not be an issue, but because we're using NetBeans in this situation, I'm going to show you the workaround to get past NetBeans. So we know that we have our file here. That's truly not the issue. The real issue is that our NetBeans cannot find the file. It exists, but it can't find it. Now, what we do is you see that we have this file here, so it exists. If you right click on it, um, or actually, excuse me. So we're going to come in here. We have our file. All right. So you see in here that if you right click on the file, you see properties at the bottom. So you want to hit properties. Now in here, you're going to see this all files, and this is actually the path right here for our file. So if you click those three dots, you see this very long link. So here you're going to want to copy this. And this is going to be the path we need to use when we are going in our file to run our code. So this is what we need. So copy that. And we're just going to close out of that and return back to our code. Now you're going to replace this text here with that path we copied, and it'll look very long like this. But basically what's going on here is it's actually using the entire computer path that is storing your files. So if you wanted to find all of these files in your computer, this is the path you would have to follow to find it. Now, for it to make sense for NetBeans, it basically added on this front part. So it's pulling in the users, it's pulling in the user account, and it's pulling in that it lives on the desktop. And then everything else after that point is actually existing inside of our IDE here. So you see Java intro, then we have a folder inside of that called source, then we have a folder inside of that called com, then we have a folder inside of that called my company, hence the dots in between. Then we have a folder inside of that called Java intro. And then inside of that, we have data.txt. So yes, it is a little complicated with NetBeans, but that's why I wanted to show you the real issues you may come across when you're dealing with Java-only IDEs. Again, you may not have this issue in Visual Studio Code, but with NetBeans, you do have to specify the entire path of the file. So now that we have that, we're going to save it, and we're going to see if it can find that file now. And there you have it. So now all of that data we had in our file is now printed out. And in this case, we are using that throws file not found exception case in here as well. But again, I don't necessarily recommend it, but I just wanted to show you the raw and uncut things you may encounter when you're coding. So go ahead and freeze it right here and get this code, as I'm going to pretty much give us a clean slate to move forward and show our try catch examples. All right, so let's go ahead and give ourselves a clean slate. Also removing this. All right, so now we have a empty space to work in. All right. So first, what we're going to do is go ahead and create our try and catch block. So again, try, catch. We don't know what we're catching yet. All right. So we're basically going to run that same example. Okay. We're going to print out the contents of a file. All right, so in here, we're going to do file. So we'll say, file, F equals new file. We're going to call it the data.txt, which we already have. Then we are going to call our scanner. So scanner sc equals new scanner. And then we're going to pass our file into here. And we're going to say here, scanner to read the file. And then we're going to do a loop. So while sc.has next line, which is basically saying while scanner has another line to be printed, then we're going to say some text here, system.out.print line, and then we are going to say sc.next line. All right, and then we have that. In our while loop, we're just going to go ahead and close scanner. And we are going to say sc.close. Now in our catch, we may know that we're going to come across the file not found exception. File not found exception. All right, and in here we're going to put file not found exception in E for the placeholder. File not found exception E. Inside of there, we're just going to write a print statement. System.out.print line file cannot open or is not found. All right. So that is just a basic try catch, but also using it with our files. Again, we are going to see what's going to happen as we run this. So remember we had that file path issue prior, so we'll keep an eye out for that and see what happens, being that we're not specifying the full path now. All right. Now you see, technically in this case, we did not have to list out our full path. It worked with no issue. But let's just say we just change it to d.txt, run file. File cannot open or is not found. We'll say data.txt. File cannot open or is not found. And again, that's because we did not specify the full path. So I'm going to place the full path there. We're going to save it. And then we're going to run it now with the full path. and our data comes out. So again, the full path is a requirement for NetBeans for it to run properly. In all cases, is it necessary? No, but in this case, it is. So just keep that in mind when you're using NetBeans. So that is an example of how to print out the contents of a file. All right. Now, moving from this point, we are then going to see an example of writing to a file. So in this one, we were printing out the content and we were reading it. So let me add that to our content here in our comment, reading, and all right. Then our next one, we're going to say writing to a file, and we're going to do our try, and we're going to do our catch. In this example, we'll do file not found, exception, E, like that. And then we are going to come here and start writing our code. So we're going to say print writer out dot, or not dot, equals new print writer. And then we're going to just say a name, output dot txt. Now we're going to use the out object. We're going to say out dot print line. This is a file. Then we could say out dot print line. We just wrote to a file using code. All right. And then we're going to say in our try that we're going to close our scanner. So out dot close. All right. So we have a solid try statement, and we're pretty much saying we want to write this to our file. And then here we can do just the exception, print line, and we could say file not created, like that. And now we basically have something ready to go. So we're going to save and go ahead and run. And here you see that it says this is data txt. It's pretty much printing out our first try catch block. In this case, we didn't have a output.txt file in place, but let's say we were to create one. Again, we would have to take the same approach, empty file, and we're going to call it output.txt. Now we have this file. We're going to right click on it, go to properties, and grab that full path from here and see what happens if we use it directly in our program again. Here, and we'll go ahead and run that. All right, you see that we're still seeing our information from the first one. Let's check on output.txt. And now you see those two files, or those two lines of code, are now in our text file. So again, when working with your NetBeans, you do have to specify the exact path for the file and where it will go. So that is a very long path typically, but I just want to bring that to your attention. Again, not always the case with everyone. All right, the last one we are going to do is do the appending. So we're going to say appending to a file. All right, so again, we're going to create our try. We're going to create our catch. And in this case, we are going to do IO exception. All right, that's basically going to find some sort of error with the file. All right, here we have try. We're going to go in and create our file object. We're going to say file writer fw equals new file writer output .txt, which we just created, and we'll say true because you should have that there. Now we're going to do the excuse me, this one is file writer. Then we're going to do our PrintWriter object. And here we are going to say PrintWriter out dot or out equals new print writer fw. So we're going to pass in that file, and then we're just going to simply add lines of text to file, and we'll say out dot print line. Oops. This is a coding demo. And then we'll do another one, out dot print line. We have made it to the end of the Java series. All right. Now we have to just put some information in our catch. In this case, we'll just put a simple text statement, print line, and we'll say error writing to file. All right, so we basically have that set up. So let's go ahead and test this portion of code using the file writer and PrintWriter. Here you see our output. We technically did not say to print it directly to the console anywhere in this code. That's why we don't see it. But if we come here, let me go back. Now, again, it didn't update it because we did not give it the full path. So I will give it the full path here. And I had to make sure that file was closed. So we'll go ahead and run it. Now take note, we have this information here. If we double click on output.txt, we do not see any updates. Now close it out, we'll return back to our code. Here you see there's one thing we did not do. We did not close the scanner or close our object in this case, which is the PrintWriter or the out. So close PrintWriter, and you say out dot close. Now this creates a major difference. All right, so we'll go ahead and save, and then we'll run our code here. All right, everything works. We'll reopen output.txt, and now you see those two lines that we added are now there. So the reason we weren't seeing it prior is because we simply missed this one line of closing the PrintWriter. So anytime you're working with things like this, please make sure you close, like we did it here, like we did it here. You have to close to avoid any issues. But overall, that is how you work with files. Again, your files can have information in it already. You can pull it in, you can use it as a loop, grab each line one by one and do something with it, or grab each line one by one and print it to the user. You can even write or update your files using these techniques. It can be a little confusing when you're first getting started, but again, as you'll get into advanced programs, you'll need to know some skills like this. So, what better way to close out this series with something like this to leave you all with a challenge and leave you all ready to explore more and get deeper into some advanced Java concepts. So, again, in this lecture series and coding tutorial series, we covered the bare minimum that you need to know to be successful in Java. Of course, there's a lot of things that go into more detail than what I mentioned, but I made sure that this whole series was beginner friendly. So, no deep diving and over explaining of certain topics. But I do encourage you all to revisit and do deeper research on any topics that did not stick or that you need more clarity on. But I just try to keep everything in this series short, sweet, and to the point. So I hope that you all enjoyed everything that you saw in this lecture series. I appreciate all of you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in another series that I host on my channel in the future.